On February 13, 2025, after spending nearly 18 years on death row, Richard Tabler was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. In this video, we'll explore the chilling story behind his crimes and reveal what his last meal was and what his final words were. Who was Richard Tabler? What did he do? And how did his life end with an apology on the execution gurney? Let's dive into this harrowing true crime tale. Richard Lee Tabler's early life gave few hints of the violent path he would take. Born in California in 1979, he endured a troubled childhood marked by neglect. As a young man, convictions for burglary and assault began stacking up. By his mid-20s, Tabler had drifted to Central Texas, working briefly at a Killeen strip club until a clash with the manager got him banned. That festering grudge would soon explode into something unthinkable. Thanksgiving weekend, 2004. While families gathered around dinner tables, Tabler was planning something horrific. On the night of November 26th, the then 25-year-old and his 18-year-old accomplice Timothy Payne lured two men to a remote area under the pretense of a stolen stereo deal. The targets? Mohammed Amine Ramuni, 28, Tabler's former boss, and Haitham Zayed, 25, Ramuni's friend. Tabler's motive was revenge. Ramuni had reportedly threatened to harm Tabler's family over a petty $10 dispute. What happened next was calculated brutality. Under cover of darkness, Tabler opened fire with a 9mm handgun. But here's where it gets even more twisted. He had Payne videotape the scene as it unfolded. After shooting both men, Tabler dragged Ramuni's wounded body from the vehicle and delivered a final shot at point-blank range. Investigators would later discover he'd purchased a camcorder, firearm, and pickup truck specifically for this deadly ambush. But the horror didn't end there. 2 days later, on November 28th, Tabler struck again. This time, his victims were two teenage girls who worked at the same club, 18-year-old Tiffany Lorraine Dotson and 16-year-old Amanda Benefield. He'd compiled a hit list of people he blamed for his grievances, and these girls were on it. Using trust against them, he'd been romantically involved with Tiffany. Tabler got them alone. Then he took their lives to prevent them from talking about the earlier incidents. 4 people. 1 holiday weekend. 1 man's twisted sense of revenge. The truly chilling part? Tabler seemed proud. He reportedly called the Bell County Sheriff's Office after the first attack to taunt deputies and brag that he would do it again. It was a warning he made good on. Law enforcement moved fast. Just 4 days after the violence, Tabler was in custody. He confessed, volunteering details about all 4 victims. His accomplice, Timothy Payne, a Fort Hood soldier who had filmed parts of the crime, received a life sentence. At trial in 2007, despite his confession, Tabler pleaded not guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. A jury convicted him and handed down a death sentence for the men's deaths. Prosecutors didn't pursue separate trials for Tiffany and Amanda's cases. The death penalty already covered his killing spree. As Bell County Prosecutor Paul McWilliam stated, the taking of the men's lives was as cold-blooded as it could be, while the girls' deaths were just senseless, done only to satisfy Tabler's paranoia. At 28 years old, Richard Tabler arrived on Texas death row, where he would spend nearly 18 more years. Those years were anything but quiet. In 2008, Tabler made national headlines when he smuggled a cell phone onto death row and used it to make threatening calls to Texas State Senator John Whitmire. He told the senator he knew the names and addresses of his children. This breach triggered a massive lockdown of the entire Texas prison system, over 150,000 inmates, while officials swept for contraband. Ironically, Senator Whitmire would later help end Texas's last meal tradition. Tabler's relationship with his own death sentence was complicated. He repeatedly asked courts to stop his appeals and speed up his execution, essentially expressing a wish to die. "I've spent the last 20 years in the courts and see no point in wasting anyone else's time," he wrote in 2024. But he wavered. His attorneys argued he wasn't mentally competent to make such decisions. He attempted to end his own life at least twice while incarcerated. In 2010, just days before a scheduled execution, he received a stay due to mental health concerns. A psychological report diagnosed him with severe mental illness that was allegedly overlooked during appeals. Still, the courts ultimately refused to halt his execution. During those long years in isolation, something shifted, or so he claimed. Tabler became deeply involved in spiritual reflection, joining faith-based programs and becoming outspoken about his beliefs. He even wrote and published books from prison, including a 2021 memoir where he confessed in detail to all 4 deaths and spoke about finding remorse. Those who met him in his final years described a man filled with sorrow, loneliness, and profound regret. Whether genuine or desperate, this transformation would define his final moments. February 13th, 2025. Nearly 20 years after that violent Thanksgiving weekend, Execution Day arrived. The 46-year-old was escorted into the red-bricked Huntsville unit as cold rain fell outside. Victims' family members gathered to watch through glass as he was strapped to the gurney. Here's something many people don't know. Texas banned special last meal requests in 2011 after an inmate ordered an elaborate feast and refused to eat it. Since then, condemned prisoners received the same meal as other inmates. No special accommodations. So Tabler didn't get to choose his final meal. Whatever was on the standard prison menu that day is what he received. There are unconfirmed reports he requested 2 fish fillets, but officially, Texas didn't provide anything special. Instead of focusing on food, Tabler seemed focused on something much heavier. Shortly after 6 p.m., when asked if he had final words, Tabler turned to face the witnesses, including his victims' loved ones. His voice shaking, he said, "There is not a day that goes by that I don't regret my actions. I had no right to take your loved ones from you, and I ask and pray, hope and pray that one day you find it in your hearts to forgive me." He admitted no apology could bring back the 4 lives he'd stolen. He apologized repeatedly to the victims' families, to his own family, to the prison staff who he said had treated him with compassion. Quoting Philippians, he expressed his belief that his execution was not the end, but only the beginning of an ultimate life in heaven. When he'd said everything, he turned to the warden. "I am finished." At 6:23 p.m., the lethal dose of pentobarbital entered his veins. As it flowed, Tabler made one final gesture. He mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," one last time. His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. Within moments, all movement ceased. At 6:38 p.m., Richard Lee Tabler was pronounced dead. In the witness room, heavy silence. George Dotson, Tiffany's father, struggled to find words. "I need time to process what I just saw," he said quietly. "I couldn't wait. It took me 20 years to get here." Tiffany's godfather was more direct. "Today is for Tiffany, and this is justice." Richard Tabler's execution was the second in Texas in 2025. To some, it proved that justice, though delayed, eventually arrives. To others, including his supporters, his death was a somber end to a story of potential redemption cut short. In the end, Richard Tabler died with an apology on his lips. His final words, "I'm sorry," stand in stark contrast to the merciless acts he committed in 2004. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, redemption, and the lasting scars left on families who lost everything. Richard Tabler's story is a chilling reminder that one violent weekend can irreparably shatter countless lives, and that even decades later, some wounds never fully heal. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more true crime stories where we explore the final chapters of those who have faced the ultimate punishment. Remember to like and subscribe for more content. And as always, stay safe out there.